This is very exciting for us, and I think what the essence of this event is that most of us here on the panel and in the room are baby boomers and Gen Xers, and we had a room full of teachers and students that are Gen Y and Gen Z, or Z students, and it's really about them and thinking about how, as the Premier said, we can really work together as educators, but also as executives to really pave the way and nurture them so that they can have role models and they can actually address this gender disparity that exists in too many of the sectors of our society. And that's really what it's about. And so I want to start off by asking each of you, in the order that you're lined up on the panel, the same question. And that is, how do we champion and prepare this next generation, the Gen Y and the Gen Z, for the future, given the lack of diversity that we are facing today in all of our organizations, not just your organizations, but universities as well. So maybe starting with you.
Well, I'm happy to say that I'm an optimist. Very much I believe in the power of optimism, but I say I'm a functional optimist because I think it's important to be optimistic with action. And you know, for me, I think as leaders, we can change the environment that these young women are moving into and the future of their careers by making sure that we as leaders accelerate that curve, that we increase the pace of change and we get there before 200 years, and I'm optimistic that we will. At PwC, I would say that we've taken a lead on this by partnering with the UN through the He for She initiative. You may have seen our posters out there, but the PwC globally is one of 10 corporate impact champions that have joined with the UN to really move the needle on how the gender issue and human equity and gender equity is moved forward globally. He for She is it's really about human rights and really appreciating that to move the needle in corporations and in business and in the economy, we need to move the needle for women at all levels. In the issue of moving women out of poverty, moving women into the workforce, equal pay, and all the levels that go up to having women in leadership. So we're proud to be part of that. Now, in making that commitment, for me as a leader, I'm excited that our global leaders have been able to sort of take that stage. We've just had a change of global leader, and it's exciting to see that, you know, that leadership is young, focused, and takes these things from the heart. Our commitment at PwC has three pieces to it. We're committed to educating, so we've actually created a gender curriculum for the UN, which is posted on the He for She global website, to enable men to have a bit more gender awareness and to help men understand this whole issue a bit more. We've committed to expanding the message and bringing the voices, so you're all here today hearing about He for She. I would really encourage all of you to take the pledge and wear the badge. I've got mine on here. The pledge is important. PwC is committed to having 80,000 of its men around the world taken the pledge in another 2 years. That'll be 80% of our males. And the third thing that we've committed to doing is really leading with measurement and action. So we have a global inclusion index. So each of our territories around the world is now measured on inclusion and specifically on gender inclusion and women in leadership. And we've drilled that down into Canada with a few things that we're doing. We've got a fantastic Women in Leadership program. We're rolling out unconscious bias training throughout the organization, and to Miklos' point, really drilling that down, making sure it's leadership from the top and drill down. And the third thing we've done, very exciting I think, is that we've committed that by 2020, 50% of our partner admits each year will be women. You know, we're at 23% partners, so we're there at the executive level, and we've got a good representation, but we've said that by 2020, half of all our partner admits nationally in Canada will be women. And it's something that we've hit here in BC on and off. We're going to hit it nationally every year as a minimum by 2020. So that's some of the leadership we're providing for these young women.
That's incredibly impressive and shows quite a comprehensive strategy. Congratulations to you. And I'm going to try to take some of those principles back to the university and make sure that the men understand how to be inclusive and how to really be champions for with you as a model.
That's a
Thank
key,
you so
and we're
much.
happy to work with you.
Thank you so much. Fiona?
Great. Thanks, Santa. For those of you who thought that this might be a Mean Girls thing, it's not. Just so you know, all the firms are doing fantastic work and are really leading in the business community. And we know that there's a compelling case for inclusion. And we've heard from Miklos how really slow the progress has been. It's relatively little action, a lot of talk. And so ultimately what we're talking about is culture. And for those of you who've heard this analogy before, I hope you'll indulge me, but I find it helpful. When you talk about culture, it's as if the business world was a saltwater stream. And for generations, everything that swam in it was a salmon. And then my generation, I'm 57, we were introduced into the salt water. We were little freshwater fish. And we leapt in and we were so excited, we were swimming around. And after a little while, we realized that life was getting tough. We just weren't swimming as fast, and the salmon were leaping upstream. So the organizations looked at us and they said, oh my goodness, we better help these little fish. So they outfitted us with oxygen tanks. So we strapped these onto our gills and we swam around, and it was heavier, it was a bit harder, and the salmon was still swimming upstream, and we weren't. And so we said, well, it must be me. It must be my swimming. I'm just not as good a swimmer. And so we exited the corporate stream. And you know, I joke that I'm essentially a salmon in stilettos because I am white male. And I've thrived in a white male environment, but that is not sustainable. We cannot fix people who are not white male. We have to desalinate the water. And so what at EY we've been doing for a long time is trying to desalinate our culture. We've made progress. Last year, 50% of our partner promotes in Canada were women. This year, it was 45%. And I'm most proud of, globally this year, 30% of the 750 new EY partners were women, which is tremendous progress, but it's not enough. What we realized is that while building a desalinated culture within EY is crucial for our people, it's a sine qua non for us to be successful, our people will not succeed if our environment, if the ecosystem is not desalinated. Because our people don't operate in a vacuum. Our women partners develop business with people, with clients, and so our clients need to be desalinated as well. And so what we've been doing is we've been working on desalinating the ecosystem. And it's probably a very tall order. We've been working on things like government policy, helping government, looking at the diversity of our suppliers. And then something that we've done as well, which I think is fairly different, is we have we've made it, my role, Chief Inclusiveness Officer, is an unusual role in that my day job is managing the British Columbia practice, but my night job is as Chief Inclusiveness Officer, and that role is an advocacy role. It's trying to get inclusion onto the board and CEO agenda as a critical business issue that it is. And so that's really being more of a corporate activist. Not something you typically associate with accountants. Sorry, Richard. So our attempts to influence and take many forms, and they involve not just female leaders, but all our male leaders as well. We collaborate on research. We're doing some really cool stuff with a global group of academics on bias interruption. We work with the Peterson Institute on the business case. We've worked to influence government policy, for instance, on the Ontario Securities Commission work. And we work to influence business leaders by sharing the lessons that we've learned and importantly, the mistakes we've made, and we've made very many. And we've used our convening power to bring CEOs together to try and drive action. And then we collaborate on all sorts of initiatives that all of us do, like the 30% Club and that kind of thing. So there are too many to mention, and I know all of us do similar things, but I think it's really important that not only do you lead within your organization, but you lead externally in corporate Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. And thank you also for your leadership at UBC as a member of the Board of Governors.
Yeah, thank you.
Philippa?
I certainly echo everything that Fiona and Elizabeth has said. If I turn it to my own personal thoughts around this, one of the things certainly that I felt and that I see in others is the confidence gap with young women. So probably about 10 years ago, when Bill Thomas first became CEO as a firm, as part of that, as his leadership team, he was very, very committed and passionate about gender diversity. And what he said was, you know, when I had a daughter, I started to take it more seriously. He knew that at that time, the female partners as part of our partnership were about 16%. And notwithstanding that we have a really strong culture around mentorship, around diversity and inclusion, the dial just wasn't changing and hadn't changed in probably a decade. So under his leadership and a number of other very inspiring leaders within our firm, he instigated direct action. We did something different to what we'd done before. So we did a number of programs and initiatives, and I'll mention a couple. The first of those was a Women in Line for Leadership program, and I know that is something that is prevalent throughout our profession. And that involves identifying potential female leadership and talent within your organization. And then following that up with skilling those individuals, investing in those individuals, and providing the opportunities for them to succeed. And that might involve giving them different kind of training, specific training that helps particularly with that confidence gap and in how to be an effective leader in a predominantly male environment. But crucially, that also included bringing those women together to network together and then providing them access to sponsors and mentors. And I say sponsors probably as the most important differentiating thing that we did. And giving those individuals the ability to have somebody pound on the table and put their name forward for the promotion and give them the next interesting assignment is, I think, what is really starting to make a difference. And so at the beginning of when we first started to run out these initiatives, our female partnership numbers were about 16%. They're nowhere near what we would like them to be, but it was very compelling to me recently. Last month, we announced our new partners, so we had 43 new partners across the country, and just over 35% of those were women. Still not where it needs to be, but it's much better than the 16%. And what was also very interesting to me when we announced our retiring partners, so we had 36 partners who retired, and only 6 of those were women. So you can see the change in that period, and going back to the optimism quote, you know, that gives me a huge sense of optimism, but also shows me that the things that we're doing are starting to make a difference. Not fast enough, but they are starting to make a difference. And so I think those kind of direct action programs, absolutely led by passionate, committed, inspired leaders, can make a difference.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Emil?
So my husband is about 10 years older than me. He's in his mid-50s, and he talks about his PSA levels. So for men in the room of a certain generation, you'll know what that means. And we're talking about a generation where PSA means something very different. Phone separation anxiety is the term that I have heard. So the question about how do you excite and prepare a generation where PSA means phone separation anxiety? It's interesting, LinkedIn reports that 71% of Gen Zs want to run their own company, and they want to give over 50% of the profits from those companies to shareholders like refugees and the homeless. You couple that entrepreneurial spirit with what the talent research says is the generation that is the most concerned and the most involved in global issues and issues of social inequality. I actually think we need to worry less about what we're doing, if I can be a bit provocative, and say we need to do a better job of listening to the talent that's new to the workforce. Because what I find is the younger talent and the new to the workforce talent, the idea that the workplace could be anything but transparent, fair, and have equality of opportunity is completely foreign to them. So we can prepare ourselves by letting a next generation really influence our thinking. At the same time, there is still a lot that all our organizations and the organizations in this audience can do. So Deloitte just released a major report on courage a couple of weeks ago. And in that report, we interviewed over 1,200 Canadian business leaders and looked at companies' performance along 5 dimensions of courage. And one of those dimensions is unite to include different people and different perspectives. And we found, as you're probably not surprised, that organizations who were courageous performed better on a whole host of measures. Everything from return on investment to profits to R&D to the more successful launch of products to hiring, etc. But here's the kicker. Only 11% of the Canadian firms we looked at could actually be classified as truly courageous. So that has huge implications for those organizations, as well as, of course, for the Canadian economy. So just to sum up, for Gen Zs, and I know they've left and gone on to other activities, I really feel that their difference is the difference, and we need to harness that difference. And for the organizations in the room, including my own, it would be get your courage on.
Well, thank you so much. I can tell you that as a dad of a Generation Y and Generation Z, both daughters, that you're absolutely right about your comments about PSA. And some of the millennials at university today expect inclusivity. And that's something to be very optimistic about. So I think we're doing something right in the salinated water, if you will, of community. And the other thing I want to say about PSA is that just yesterday at UBC, PSA, I was able to give these awards, and PSA there stands for the Presidential Service Awards. And the good news about that is that the majority of recipients were women. So that's something to cheer about, isn't it? Yeah. Now I want to actually ask a specific question of each of you and go in reverse order, starting with you, Mio, and that's this. What do you think the future of work will look like? How do we need to change the traditional work models to win and retain winning talent? What will be most important?
Wow, there's a lot of questions in there. We've spent a lot of time looking at the future of work, and I'm sure many of you have too. All the research says the future of work is going to be increasingly flexible, agile, open, and heavily dependent on technology. But what we choose to focus on at Deloitte is rather than try to get really granular on the future of work, we're really concerned about the passion of the workforce and engagement. And our research tells us that there's 4 major factors that drive engagement. So inclusion is one of them, well-being, purpose. Our people tell us over and over again they want to work for a company that's about much more than meeting its plan or making money. And the other is development, in particular leadership development. So we really believe the future of our firm, and I think, if I can be, again, a bit provocative, the future of the entire country really depends on the power to participate. And you can't participate if you're not engaged. And as a group of firms, we solve some really complex, high-stakes problems. We need all ideas on the table. So for us, it's all about an engaged workforce.
Thank you very much. Actually, before we move on, I wanted just to remind the audience that there's a platform. I think we're using something called Pigeonhole Live to allow the audience to input questions and to vote for their favorite question. So if you could start thinking about that, because in the next part of this panel discussion will involve your questions, and we'll turn to those in 3 more conversations after the 3 next questions. And we'll jump to Fiona, if that's okay.
Okay.
What role do you think corporations play in leading the ecosystem towards equality? You've talked about a lot of things that you're doing at EY. And how do we expedite that change, both internally and, as you've mentioned, externally in the ecosystem?
I think I'd be sort of just piling onto myself. I think that it's really about leadership. Inclusion is all about culture and leadership, and so we need everybody to step up, to have courage. Sometimes it's an uncomfortable conversation. If say somebody who's serving you is homogeneous, they present a homogeneous slate, it's uncomfortable to say, do you not have any women, or do you not have any minorities, or whatever it is. And so I think that that's what we need to do. And this is not something that you delegate to politicians or to CEOs alone. It's for every single one of us as leaders to do.
Actually, all of you do serve on board of directors, boards of trustees, board of governors. Would you say that, Fiona, that's an important thing? Because sometimes the C-suite or the management team, senior management team, is really focused on just getting the work done.
Yep.
And the oversight role of governors and trustees is probably very, very important. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, as a governor, right? That was a real softball.
And I really do hope that you'll do that, actually.
Yeah, I think it's the role of the board to ask those questions.
Absolutely.
And to focus on the long term, and ultimately inclusion and culture is about the long-term sustainability of the organization.
Yeah, thank you so much. Philippa, how does KPMG actively and consciously support female talent on the road to leadership? You've talked a little bit about that, but do you have any other examples that you haven't been able to touch on?
Yeah, so I talked a little about the Women in Line for Leadership and some of the action around there. I think one of the other key pillars there is around unconscious bias, and Elizabeth, you mentioned that also. So we have put, so starting right at the top, it started with our management committee and our partnership group have all been through some quite extensive unconscious bias training, and that is being cascaded out to all of our teams. And that impacts us in so many different ways, and you going through that training, where do you learn about like your own unconscious bias? Where you come from, and how that frames your decisions and your judgments. And being aware of that, and then how you can challenge yourself with tough questions is really very, very powerful. So I think putting our people through that has changed the lens that we use when we're recruiting, when we are developing our people, when we're interacting with our clients. It's been very, very powerful, and we're continuing to build on that. And it gives you the tools to ask those tough questions, right? I mean, some of the conversations that we have, people don't always know how to ask the questions. They know something's not quite right. They don't know how to ask the questions. And I think doing this kind of training really just gets it out there. And you might not say it quite right the first time you ask, but getting it on the table and having the conversation is key.
Thank you very much.
Can I just pile on a little bit there? I mean, I mentioned this bias interrupter working group. It's a group of global academics who are behavioral economists, industrial psychologists, and social psychologists, and we're looking at yes, I'm biased, and there's all sorts of research to show that even if you're biased and you're aware of it, you can't really stop it. It's a shortcut in your brain. And so what are the practical things businesses can do that can stop bias from happening? So things like, blind interviewing and all of those sorts of things. I know PwC is doing some of that globally, but I'd recommend that people start reading some of that sort of bias interruption research, because it's fascinating.
Absolutely.
Right.
I would agree. Like when you, even as a recruiter, when you read somebody's resume and there's a photograph, like,
Yep.
You've made some assumptions already.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, Elizabeth, PwC is an active supporter, as you've mentioned, of UN's He for She movement, and you've talked a little bit about what you're doing internally to get everyone involved in PwC with that movement. But it's really important for the millennials, and eventually for Generation Y and Z, individuals that will be populating all of our institutions.
They're here already.
They're already here. And eventually, very, very soon, 80% of the workforce will be millennials.
Yeah.
And so the question is, what do you think is happening in terms of getting Generation Y and Z involved in he for she?
Well, I think it's, once they're in our organisation, they won't be able to avoid it, for sure. Yes. but I think in terms of our approach to that involvement, I'd speak to the study. PwC has done this study, the female millennial, where we actually we surveyed 10,000 millennials globally. Less than half of them were PwC employees. The other, more than half, were outside of PwC. And we used the power of data analytics to find out, to your point, Mio, exactly what it is that these younger people are going to need to be successful and build careers in our workplaces. And it was really quite telling. And I think we take some things that we expected from it, but also some surprises. And again, to Mio's point about what these young people are going to want in the workforce, it's about career progression, opportunities, interesting career progression, and an environment that really will engage them and give them the ability to develop their skills. So we actually asked this 10,000 group, their prime reasons for leaving companies, because I think we need to think about, to make them stay, we need to think about what would make them leave. And exactly those reasons, the absence of those things, were why people leave. And I think it's important to bust a myth on some of this, that we often talk about, there's this myth, I think, that women leave to spend more time with families, and that's a cause of this absence of women in leadership. We find that's actually not the case. That women and men leave in exactly equal quantities for exactly that reason, and it's only the 6th highest reason why women and men do leave the workplace. What actually causes that imbalance, and to keep these millennials in our organisation right to the top, is that we're recruiting. When we recruit outside of the campus, we're recruiting way more men than women. So at campus, I think we all recruit very, very even workforce. So we look at our campus intake. It's very, very even, maybe even slightly weighted towards women. That population leaves in about the same numbers, men and women. But what we do is we recruit above the campus, and we find that we recruit way more men than women. And I think that's where the data analytics have told us that. Now we're actually executing actions to keep that group, to make sure we're bringing that group in, even if it's not their first career. And I think it speaks to your point that there's many different careers. We as accounting firms are going to have lots of people working for us who didn't start with us.
That's right.
More and more. And we've got to figure out how to deal with that. The CPA-BC perhaps have got to figure out how to deal with that because of the non-traditional career routes. So that's how I think we've got to adapt. That's how I think we'll bring he for she home within all of our accounting organisations, and for the CPA-BC as well. I think they're going to have to show some leadership on this as well, which they already are. So we appreciate that.
If I can just interrupt, Elizabeth, I think you made a really interesting point there about so many people in all of our organizations won't actually spend their entire careers at our firms.
Right.
And many of them will go out and work for your organization. So in so many ways, we are a talent feeder system to the broader Canadian and global economy. So can we collectively develop a greater sense of gender equality, inclusion, and make sure we're putting out a generation of talent that goes out into the broader workforce that's actually living and continuing to build on a lot of the ideas that we're talking about?
And I think it's great that we've got a diverse range of business leaders in the rooms here. We've got a lot of industry people here, and I think to exactly that point, we are an ecosystem together, and we thrive with each other and with that interchange. So I think it's great that this is the group having this discussion today because of exactly that movement.
I'm actually going to take this opportunity to ask a question that will hopefully be helpful to UBC and to me in my role. You talked about campus recruiting and how it's relatively even in terms of how you recruit from the campuses. But I'm pretty sure that there are things that we can do even better as universities to help not only, I mean, it's becoming more and more equal in terms of the gender balance, but even beyond that, are there things that you think universities can do in changing the saline content of the ecosystem?
Yes.
I would just throw in building confidence, encouraging confidence, helping across your population to build that confidence to step up, and I'll let someone else jump in.
I totally agree. I think like it starts really early. If you think about that the framing that you have as a child and how you move through the education system, like we hire people who are maybe 20 years old. A lot of it is already in place. So I think there is a big role for universities to be identifying potential leadership talent and nurturing it and teaching it in a way that is very diverse and recognizes the different skills. And I think in our community here in Vancouver, it's even more important, I think, because of the diversity of the community that we have, that leadership is not that old guy leadership style, and that starts really young. So yes, please, I think there are some things that we can do.
Any other advice?
Well, I would say, I mean, I've got tons of advice. So
Yes.
we haven't got enough time, sorry. I think it's, first of all, I think a lot of people, a lot of students coming out of universities have grown up in an egalitarian environment, and they don't know that the corporate stream is salinated. So, and when they find out, it's too late. They've already missed out on some of those really cool experiences that would have grown their careers. So I think that's one. The other is around power and influence, and really making students understand the importance of power and influence and the use of it for good. That it's not something that you're a megalomaniac if you want it, but that you can actually, you should try and influence, and you should try and get power because you can do good with it.
Thank you.
We see a lot of students coming in and they walk us through their grades, what they've learned. There's a heavy emphasis on the university brand, on their technical subject matter expertise, which is important because, of course, let's face it, that's what clients hire us to help them solve. But I think what universities really do is they build critical thinkers. And we build leaders together, but you build critical thinkers. And we need more and more critical thinkers to solve some really challenging societal problems and the business problems we're all paid to solve. So I think the more you can talk to your students about what you're really getting here is the value of critical thinking and a great education, that's huge for us.
Well, you'll be happy to hear that in part of a couple of retreats with deans and executives, that rose to the top.
That's great.
And the other thing was that we want part of our mission and vision to be in using any influence that arises from education to be for the public good. So hope you're happy about that.
That's great. Wonderful.
Now we're moving on to as you can see, the questions have popped up. And I'm going to start with those that had the most votes for the questions that the audience would like answered. And my eyesight's very bad, so I'm going to have to squint. With 77 votes, how can you respond, that's much easier for me to see, to men who argue that supporting women puts them at a disadvantage? How do you help them understand the inequality? And anyone can chime in.
Doesn't put them at a disadvantage.
Yeah,
it's better for everyone. Everyone rises. Everyone. Our business is better. Our economy is better. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I would say that the playing field is not level. And so when you support women, all you're doing is giving them access to the same things that men naturally have. Just, one little example, we have something called Entrepreneur of the Year, where it's a global program. We celebrate entrepreneurs, and we realized that women were not applying, but they were also not winning. And so we had this program called, we first of all studied why not. And what we found out was that women entrepreneurs don't get access to capital, and they don't get access to the networks that men have. And there's a little bug here, it's really annoying. And so we came up with this Entrepreneurial Winning Women program. And when we provided those two things, access to capital and access to networks, the women's results were as good, if not better, than the men's. And so that's it, and it's good for all of us. The economy, it makes jobs, and we all get a pension. So that's cool.
Yeah.
So they should be happy. So-
I would totally echo what Fiona has said, but also I think a lot of the times we had that question. So when we're rolling out a Women in Line for Leadership, I mean, people say, well, hey, what about me? Does that mean I'm not going to move ahead at the same rate? And I think what I found in those discussions, provide the facts, provide objective data that the other individual can understand, and help them then become the next advocate for what you're trying to do.
I'm really glad this question was raised because there are so many men in leadership organizations, and I sometimes find that it can be uncomfortable for men to ask this because it could almost appear as if they're not supportive of gender equality, and this I find tends to be true of white heterosexual men. My husband and I are the parents of 2 sons, ages 9 and 11, and it's quite interesting because they have come home from school and started to say things like, why do girls need so much help? And I said, well, what do you mean? Because all the research, of course, says girls do very well in school. But they've noticed things like the Because I Am a Girl campaign, and talking about gender equality. To them, it just doesn't quite make sense. So we try to have very open conversations about the benefits of full inclusion. And at Deloitte, every individual is unique and has something unique to contribute. So it's about harnessing the uniqueness in every individual, and men in traditional power positions are in a great position to be able to help. So that's how we frame it.
Thank you. I can tell you as a president of now 2 large universities that this is a real concern among the boys.
Yeah.
And you know, to the extent where on social media you see questions like, what about me? Where's the program for me? And in fact, the thing that's rather scary is that sometimes there are Facebook pages that come up saying, the white male student union.
Right.
And so I think that underscores what you all said. That's what a university can do, is to frame the conversation so that they understand the power of a diverse workforce. And I pledge that we will do that. So thank you for that.
I have a little white male son, you
Yes.
know, and he absolutely, he's 17, he hates my salmon stories. He says, you're trying to kill the salmon. So anyway.
Move on to the second question, which got 61 votes. I'm waiting for it to pop up and be large enough for me to read. How do we promote mentorship within companies to ensure that our young female leaders have those role models?
Well, I'd love to answer that one, Santa, because Catalyst has done some great research that shows that women get way more mentoring than men.
Yeah.
So lots of people behind the scenes give us advice on how we should behave and how to succeed. What we're lacking is sponsorship. So, and the difference between them is that somebody's sponsored when you're actually championed. And I've actually seen this when I sat on our firm's executive. You'd hear somebody say, oh, I think John would be great as a partner. You know, I've worked with John, et cetera, et cetera. They would say, what do you think about Mary? And that's subtle and it's unintentional, but one comes with the heft of the credibility and the power of the individual promoting, and the other is just sort of like a toss it into the middle of the room. And so I think that's what women need, is champions, people who will actually put their own personal credibility on the line and say, I know she'll do a great job.
A wise partner once told me that a mentor talks to you and a sponsor talks about you, which I think is exactly what you're getting at. Sheryl Sandberg has a great chapter in her book, Lean In, called Will You Be My Mentor? Of course, the play on Will You Be My Mother? And that is really worth reading, because to your point about being over-mentored and under-sponsored, that's a huge issue in a lot of organizations.
Let me just get one more question in. With 80 votes, what is preventing women from stepping up to a senior leadership role? How can we encourage women to put their hand up? Is that a fair question?
It's a really fair
It's a fair question.
Yeah.
I think it is a very fair question, and I think, you know, there's the environment, so that I think there's your kind of ecosystem setting the environment, and then, you know, we've probably all experienced it where you've held yourself back, and where does that come from? So I think a lot of it is around the confidence in the individual, and how you model leadership in your organization to enable like a young woman with leadership potential to really see that there are different ways of being a leader, and then encouraging and nurturing that and rewarding it in ways that are meaningful to that individual, which may not be the ways you're currently rewarding your workforce. to really encourage people to put their hand up. And if people are not putting their own hand up, that's when the sponsor, because we did a survey that said, I think 9 out of 10 of the women that we surveyed didn't really know how to ask for a sponsor. So if you're a business leader in an organization and you know that, then you need to be more proactive in creating the environment for sponsors to come forward as opposed to waiting for the individual to ask.
I'd like to just throw in that I think one thing that's really preventing women is women think through the consequences of not succeeding.
Yes.
I hate to use the fear of failure, because I don't think it's a fear of failure. I think we actually think through what might happen if we don't succeed. And I think the thing that we all have to do in the room, and that's something that we can do, and I've seen Fiona do it actually, is talk about our failures. And Nicole spoke about that. That is so critical to show that we as leaders, we know we're not perfect. We fail too. And that it's so powerful to share that with staff, with people coming up through the organization, to show that failure is not a scary thing, and that the consequences are never bad. I mean, I've heard you speak about this, and it made a huge impact on me.
Yeah.
Well, we're out of time. I hope that you'll join me in thanking this group of amazing leaders. And there's a lot of reason for optimism with the leadership that they're showing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.